Okay, I'm off. Bye.
Do you want to give a few minutes?
Yeah,
Maybe-
good morning, everybody. I see that we have our participants joining. We'll commence in 2 more minutes, or 1 more minute. Super, I think we have a quorum now. So I'll go ahead and start. Thank you so much for joining today's session, hosted by the US-Mexico Foundation and PJCOMEXI. My name is Alma Caballero, and today we'll be honored to have the participation of an incredible group of strong women that are knowledgeable about the US-Mexico bilateral relationship. Our hope today is to be able to provide a context of what has been going on with the US-Mexico bilateral relationship over the last 4 years, and then talk about what's to come in the next 4 years under the Biden administration. We'll start our discussion today with Shannon O'Neil. Shannon O'Neil serves as a Vice President and Deputy Director of Studies and Nelson and David Rockefeller Senior Fellow for Latin American Studies at the Council of Foreign Relations. She's based in New York. She's an expert in Latin America, global trade, US-Mexico relations, corruption, democracy, and immigration. She holds a BA from Yale University and a master's in international relations from Yale University as well as a PhD from Harvard. She is the author of Two Nations Indivisible, Mexico, the United States, and the Road Ahead. Thank you so much, Shannon, for being with us here today.
No, my pleasure.
We will then proceed with Vanessa Rubio. Vanessa Rubio had a 25 years long career in Mexico's public sector, including serving most recently as senator in Mexico, as well as 3 times deputy minister, including foreign affairs, social development, and finance. She was involved in the negotiations of the USMCA and is now based in London, where she will be serving also as professor at the London School of Economics, where she received her graduate degree. She's also a senior advisor at McClarty Associates in Washington, DC. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for being with us today. And finally, we will also hear from María José Urzúa. María José is a PhD student at Princeton University, the Department of Politics. She is a 3rd-year PhD student where she specializes in international relations and comparative politics with a regional focus on Latin America. She has a master's degree in politics from Princeton and is a Fulbright Garcia Robles Scholar. She is originally from Mexico City, but again, as mentioned, she is now based in Princeton, but given COVID, she is now in Mexico City. So María José, thank you so very much for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, we have also Nuria Palou, who will be my partner in crime in this session. She will be moderating the second half of our discussion today. Thank you, Nuria.
Alma, and it's a pleasure to share the floor with you and with all of you. I admire all of you so much. And Alma is director for Mexico for the McCarthy Associates. She holds a bachelor and a master's in Latin American Studies from Georgetown University. And she also was Latin American policy advisor at Washington, D.C. at a law firm. So I'm really happy to be sharing the floor with you guys. And well, let's start.
Thank you, Nuria. So let's begin. So first, Shannon, I would like to ask you, why is it important to study and to know the importance of the Mexico bilateral relationship? As discussed in the initiation of the remarks, we're hoping that not only the typical suspects that follow the intrinsicies of the Mexico and US political reality tune in, but also, the average Mexican and the average American that are impacted by this bilateral relationship. And in addition to that, if you could also highlight what are the lessons learned that we can adapt and take into account moving forward from the past 4 years of the Trump administration, first with the Peña Nieto administration and then with the Andrés Manuel López Obrador administration. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Alma. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. When I think it's very clear in Mexico City that this is the case, but in Washington, it's not always clear whether Mexico or frankly Canada, for that matter very much, right? And you look at some of those who, rise to be Secretary of State or hold big positions, and usually they focus on other parts of the world in the beginnings of their career. They focus on the Middle East, or increasingly they focus on China. Before they used to focus on Russia, sort of places that were seen as the hotspots, are seen as the most vital for the US security, national security, or influence around the world. And what the challenge, I think, for Mexico, but for US-Mexico relations, is that while it is often not urgent, it's vitally important. And the urgent usually gets the attention, while the vitally important often gets pushed down under the rug. And, I've heard sort of foreign policy folks sometimes say, if Mexico had a terrorist organization, then everybody would be paying attention, right? But instead we're focused on Iraq, or we're focused on other places, right? And the great thing for the United States for many decades, actually centuries, is that Mexico does not have all of that, right? It has its challenges, and I know we're going to get into a lot of those, but right, it is not a place that has has terrorist cells. It is not a place that has huge uncontrolled swaths of territory. It is not a place that, for decades, it has been fairly peaceful. Now, that we can talk about violence, we talk about those things, but it is not a challenge in the way that many other places around the world are. And so in that sense, it doesn't get the attention often that people believe it deserves. And, we can talk about, and, any of us who live on the other side of the border, you see the deep ties, right? You look at trade relations, and Mexico is one of the top partners of the United States and one of the biggest buyers from the United States, frankly, keeping thousands of businesses afloat. You see the ties in people and the number of people that move back and forth and the families that span both sides of the border. You see the ties in security. We see it in terms of the drugs that move back and forth, of human trafficking that happens across the border, of other challenges that we face at the border. And you see it in a dozen other areas. You see it in water that we use together. You see it in the environment that we share, the air that crosses the border. You see it in all the other border logistics that happen. So there are, when you look at the US-Mexico embassy, or the US embassy in Mexico, and there are almost 36 different US agencies represented in there. And it's, of course, things like Department of Homeland Security, issues of, the DEA and issues of security, but it's people like the FDA in terms of agriculture. There's so many different agencies that are there. And I think that attests to the importance of the relationship. And it's one of the biggest embassies that the US has all around the world. And that's because so many parts of the US government have an interest in what happens in Mexico and work with their counterparts in the country, as much as, the Mexican embassy in Washington is also a huge embassy for that very reason too, because there's so many areas where the two countries touch upon each other. And what's interesting, actually, I have to say, as we look at the last 4 years and sort of transitioning to that, is how much the direction of the relationship has changed. Because we had seen the last 20, 25 years before that, this very deep, this very broad relationship with lots of assistant secretaries and subsecretarios talking to each other about a whole host of issues day in and day out that affect the two countries. And what we've seen over the last 4 years under the Trump administration is a real shift. We've seen a personalization of the relationship that didn't exist in the 2 decades before. So most of the big decisions are taken out of the White House. Right? They're either the president or his son-in-law or a couple other small part of a group that are making decisions, not this breadth and depth of agencies and departments that usually would have a strong say. So you don't have what in the United States people like to call the interagency process, where different agencies, Department of Defense and State Department and Agriculture and Energy all get together and talk about things. That's not the way decisions have been made. It's been very personalistic coming out of the White House. That means necessarily it's been quite narrow. right? If you only have a couple of people making decisions, if you don't have this whole breadth of scientists and experts and bureaucrats participating, then only a few issues get on the table. And so we've really seen the last 4 years a focus in on migration and the US interest in Mexico stopping the flow of migrants, particularly from Central America. We've seen an interest in trade. So we've seen the USMCA, the new trade agreement, go forward. But those really have been the only focus. And the other myriad of issues that usually occupied US-Mexico relations and sort of the energy behind it have fallen by the wayside or really have not made as much progress, been that involved as they have in the past. You have seen a relationship that is much more transactional than in the past. So there's been a lot of, if you stop migrants, then I won't put tariffs on you. And so there's been a bit more back and forth in that way. So this transactional personal relationship, which also was not a hallmark of the history of US-Mexico relations, that had lots of organizations with big names like the High Level Economic Dialogue and things like that. But those meant something because it brought all these people together. Those have been discontinued. They're not part of the relationship. And frankly, what I would say is I think those last 4 years, this personalistic, this transactional, this narrow focus has been detrimental to this broader US-Mexico relationship, because even if the US government is not focused on it or the Mexican government is not focused on it, it doesn't mean that these issues don't continue, right? It doesn't mean that we don't have environmental issues, we don't have water issues, we don't have trade issues, we don't have migration issues, we don't have security issues. Those all continue even if you don't have people on both sides focusing on it and talking about it together. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Vannesa, I would like now to ask you the same question to Shannon, however, with a twist to it. Given your role as serving in the Mexican government, particularly under Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs, and given that you were in the midst of the beginning of the Trump administration, looking back, what's that discerning process looking like? What are the lessons learned that you can share with a group of the US-Mexico bilateral relationship under the Trump administration? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alma, Nuria, and I'm very glad to share this panel with María José and Shannon. And thanks to the COMEXI and the US-Mexico Foundation for the space. I would have to say that I agree with what Shannon has said, but I would touch on the last point she made. I think despite of the fact that there was no one like conducting the relationship, creating like a broader narrative and prioritizing the relationship, things happen. So we still have, you know, one of the biggest borders in the world. We still have a very intense trade and economic relationship and financial relationship. We still have border issues. We still have health issues. We still have water issues. We still have, you know, so the relationship is so dense and so profound that you cannot stop it. And that's exactly to your point, Alma, one of the lessons learned from what we have seen in the last 4 to 5 years, which is that this relationship is really deep, and it's really intense, and it's really ongoing, and no one can stop it. Either you decide to, you know, put yourself on top of it and set your priorities and set the dialogue and say, okay, let's coordinate and let's negotiate and let's, you know, move ahead towards this direction or this other way. But I think one lesson learned is that it's too big, and it just goes along despite of the decisions being made in both countries. I would agree that one thing that we've seen is the personalization of the bilateral relationship, although I think it has happened somehow in the past, not in the degree, obviously, that this has you know, turned out. But we had this very relevant Bush and Fox bilateral relationship that was based also on their persona, and that their relationship you know, made a huge change in the bilateral priorities, and those with Central America and the rest of the continent. So I think we have seen that in the past, not in the way we have seen it this time. And it's due to what happened in the US, but also due to what happened in Mexico. One of the biggest things I think we have experienced in the last years in terms of the bilateral relationship is the electoral processes, both sides of the border. So Mexico has changed enormously as well. The US changed enormously, but Mexico has changed as well. And I think that the institutional rigor and the institutionality that Mexico provided to the relationship is not there anymore in the terms it was before as well. So this is another huge change we can look into. The changes that both the electoral processes in the US and Mexico have given to the relationship in terms of it not being as institutionalized as it was before, but also due to what has been happening in Mexico, no? And I think definitely that in regards to your other question, Alma, on how was this change felt in Mexico when the Trump administration came in, basically it was felt with a lot of uncertainty. If I would have to use one word, it would be uncertainty. Uncertainty because back then, remember, we were in the discussion of whether NAFTA was going to move forward or someone was going to just blow it off and nothing would replace it, no? So we were in a context of uncertainty, we were in a context of volatility, we were in a context of the possibility of Mexico having an economic crisis due to the back then fall of 40% of the oil prices, and there were threats about Mexico losing, grades of investment grades from the rating agencies. So that was a very complex context as well, the one that we faced back when Donald Trump was elected. And now again, I think there's a lot into this pot that we are looking into in terms of, as I said, both electoral processes having changed the relationship, but now with two huge shocks, one on the health side and the other in the economic side, that obviously are going to change the narrative, the priorities, and we're going to be seeing obviously a more institutional relationship, but that doesn't mean that it's an easier one for Mexico. I think that too many expectations are being put on the Mexican side from what will happen in the US. And I think that is yet to be seen what kind of relationship we have with the US. Obviously, it's going to be a positive one that is more looking forward, one that focuses on, as I said, institutional priorities like climate, like the economy, like trade, like migration, like security. And we're going to be having perhaps less noise in the narrative, but we're going to have more intense and more dense relationship between institutions. And that's going to be a novelty for Mexico's current administration and for Mexico's current government. So it's yet to be seen how that is going to be dealt. But I stop here and I don't focus on the future, so we can discuss that in the coming panel. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vannesa. Maria Jose, I would like to end this segment of the discussion with you. Given your current area of analysis and focus and study, what have you found? What can you share with us? What are those lessons learned that could set the base also for what's to come? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I want to start by thanking the US-Mexico Foundation and the Programa de Jóvenes del COMEXI for inviting me to participate in this panel with an amazing group of experts and who are also women I greatly admire. So I want to start by mentioning some traits of the Trump administration's foreign policy, one, and how that has affected Mexico. First, Trump is willing to connect all the time domestic politics with international politics and foreign policy. I think this has been pernicious for Mexico in the sense that it is, in my view, a reality that Mexico has become like a domestic politics issue for the United States in the context of the Trump administration. Second, Trump's nationalism and xenophobia, which has been particularly pernicious for Mexican immigrants living in the US. Third, his views of economic protectionism and how that affected like a stability in the institutional and legal framework for our trade relationship and the uncertainty we had during the negotiations of the now USMCA. Fourth, this idea that Trump has always been willing to just get rid of the commitments and spoken and unspoken rules with traditional partners. So the idea that we can just like wake up and have like a Trump tweet that will upend the whole bilateral relation has created a lot of uncertainty. And fifth and last, this confrontational and very unpredictable Trump way of operating, which is also related to what both Shannon and Vanessa mentioned, the personalization of politics and decisions being made at the highest level from one day to another without necessarily following like the institutional channels that we had been used to in the US-Mexico relationship. So I think this has been detrimental for the US-Mexico relationship, but like given the circumstances and considering all these traits, I do think that it has been less bad than what we could have expected. And I think this speaks to the profound links between Mexico and the United States and a relationship that is so complex and also multi-level, multi-actor, multi-issue, that it cannot simply be upended by the politics of whoever is in the White House. I do agree with Shannon, however, that we have not been able to advance like more in depth in most of the issues of the bilateral relation, and I hope this will change. But I also do think that the Mexican government, I don't know if the Mexican people or Mexico as a country, but the current Mexican government has won something like from the current administration. And that is, even though uncertainty has been very pernicious, and that that uncertainty has been very pernicious, but also that in this case, it has led to a focus on a couple of issues that are a priority for Trump and for his domestic politics, and also to a total lack of scrutiny in other affairs that are, I think, relevant, including like the situation of human rights and democracy in Mexico, and also like a deeper scrutiny regarding, for example, compliance with the rules of NAFTA and now of the USMCA. And I think that actually has not necessarily been bad for the Mexican government, and that it will lead to that this will change and will lead to more tense and more complex relations with the Biden administration. But yeah, as Vanessa, I will just like leave it here so that we can speak of the future of US-Mexico relations like in other segments. Thanks.
Thank you so very much, Maria Jose. Now, Nuria, take it from here. Thank you.
Alma, thank you so much. I actually agree a lot about what the three of you just mentioned, especially regarding the transactional relation between Trump and AMLO's administration. I think that's like on point of what has happened in the last 4 years. And from now on, I would like to speak and to lead the conversation on what to expect from a Biden-Harris administration for the next 4 years. Like, I must admit that I was thrilled yesterday to see such nominees. I don't know, like Anthony Blinken for Secretary of State, Alejandro Mayorkas, an immigrant himself, a Cuban immigrant for Secretary of Homeland, a woman, the first woman to lead intelligence, Avril Haines. And I would like to ask questions related on both, on two perspectives, the political and the economic link between Mexico and the US relationship. And to go forward, I want to ask Vannesa, what do you think these candidates will change with this bilateral relationship?
Thank you, Nuria. Yeah, I think a lot will change. A lot will change from the new administration. It's a dramatic change in terms of foreign policy, as Maria Jose was saying. It's the difference between seeing foreign policy as a domestic extension rather than seeing foreign policy in its own right, no? But that is not the case. I mean, again, I will bring Mexico's vision on this. Mexico has not changed and is not changing at this moment. So we will still have Biden, but we will still have Andrés Manuel on this side, considering that the best foreign policy is domestic policy, no? And having a sort of Macuspanization of Mexican foreign policy, if I am allowed to say that word, because basically we have not had any participations in summits, I mean, let alone the COVID and the format, whatever. We haven't had state visits, very few of them in Mexico. We haven't attended any state visit. So basically, I think we're still going to be seeing a very, narrow view of foreign policy in Mexico, at least from the presidency. And we're going to be still looking into a lot of electoral politics in Mexico, in the vision of Mexico on foreign policy and on the relationship with the US. It's the only answer that I can find for the Mexican president, not congratulating at this point Biden for winning the election. No, the only way you can explain that is, again, that you're seeing foreign policy as a electoral domestic issue, and it's not that way. No. So we're going to be looking into a lot of new problems that are going to be arising with this institutionalization of the foreign policy that Mexico's current system is not used to dealing with. So we're going to be dealing with trade, no, and perhaps the most recent labor and environment controversies are going to be brought up in the context of the USMCA. We have to understand in Mexico that USMCA is not a la carte. USMCA is a set menu, no? So it's not that you cherry pick from the things that you like and disregard the environment because you don't like it, and disregard competition because you don't like it, national treatment of companies because you don't like it. I mean, it's something that you're abided to in a whole, as a whole. So you cannot get away with it. No. What about we're going to be looking into topics that haven't risen before in the last years, such as human rights, such as migration in a different view, democracy-related topics, such as erosion of institutions, erosion of the rule of law, erosion of the freedom of speech. So those are the kind of things that Mexico is used to dealing with in a democratic, in a Democrats-based system in the US, no? That is yet to be seen how the AMLO government and the 40 government's response to. Is not going to be a walk in the park, as I said. And as I said, many Mexicans were like cheering up, saying, well, all of Mexico's problems are going to be solved now. And no, Mexico's problems have to be solved in Mexico, and have to be solved by Mexicans, and have to be solved by good economic policy and good climate investment in order for investments to flow to Mexico, and good labor laws, and the proper implementation of the USMCA, among other things. So I think it's worth thinking that it's a very positive change, I think, in terms of the narrative, in terms of the depth, in terms of the institutionalization of foreign policy and the bilateral relationship, but it's not going to be solving Mexico's problems, because Mexico's problems are Mexican, and we need to solve them back at home, no? So I leave my comments here. Thank you, Nuria.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I'm going to go to Shannon now. I really would like you to focus and to sort of clarify, since you have the general overview of these former Obama administration profiles. And I don't know if you have any insights on the counterparts, especially related to security, intelligence, cooperation agencies, since we are living in Mexico like violence and a security crisis currently. And also maybe an insight on the new change of framework with this new Biden-Harris administration, what their perspectives might be related to the TEMEC or USMCA with them as the current administration. Thank you.
Great. I concur with everything that Vanessa just said, right? And I think part of the big change is we had a very personal, transactional presidency, and now you're going to go back. The process is going to change. It's going to go back to a more institutional, a much broader, a sort of day-to-day bureaucratic process that brings in experts and scientists. So the people who will guide day-to-day US-Mexico policy will be in the various agencies, and they'll have expertise and knowledge, and they'll know about some of these things, and they'll be guiding it. Now, yes, will the president or the Secretary of State or Janet Yellen or others step in at times and guide it? Of course they will, right? And we will see interactions between Treasury and Hacienda, or we'll see interactions, but sort of that day-to-day process will change. And what I agree totally with Vannesa. I think it's going to be quite difficult in the relationship, right? Trump was actually very easy on Mexico. As long as you stop migrants, I don't care what you do. I don't care what you do on any other policy, right? Even to the point where US companies have been demanding that the US government do something about what they feel are their contracts being abrogated or eroded, and only the US Congress stepped up. There's a bipartisan support from people on both sides of the aisle, but the White House has been shockingly quiet about this. And that is going to end under the new administration, right? As you were saying with TEMEC, with the USMCA, there are a lot of provisions in there, and expect a new Biden administration to use that instrument because it is an agreement between the two countries and it has been forgotten. So one is company rights, investor rights, which I think will be a big issue from the beginning. And another issue will be the labor provisions. And those have yet to be built out. We haven't seen them tested, but I know from within Washington already, the AFL-CIO and others have been building cases and have yet to release them or put them forward. But I think we will see that very early in a Biden administration, is both labor unions and others with interests, as well as members of Congress and the executive branch, focusing on those issues. And so trying to work out with Mexico how exactly that mechanism is going to work. And so both of those issues, I think, will be somewhat uncomfortable for the two governments to deal with. The other issue I would put up for Mexico that I think will be an immediate one from the get-go, and also where I see tensions, is on climate change and the environment. And maybe you all have another example, but as I look around the world, as far as I can tell, Mexico is the only country in the whole world that is actively investing in going back to a dirtier fossil fuel-based matrix, right? Saudi Arabia is investing billions in solar energy. Other big oil producers are investing in wind and geothermal and all this stuff. And only Mexico is going back to an energy system that will be much dirtier. And the challenge, I think, for Mexico is not just the US there, but Europe right now is looking to pass a tax on any carbon, they call it a carbon border adjustment tax. So if you make things with a dirtier energy matrix, you will be taxed. And I wouldn't be surprised if the US follows that, particularly under a Biden administration. So you would be talking goods from Mexico would cost more when they are exported, particularly in heavy manufacturing, like the auto sector and other these sort of shining lights of Mexico's industry. This change in the energy matrix, I think, is going to be a huge challenge. And it is something that you're going to see in US domestic policy, this big green energy push and stimulus, but you're going to see it in every part of US foreign policy. So those are big issues, I think, that will be put on the table that we haven't dealt with. And then just to coincide with Vannesa, the Biden administration, Tony Blinken, these other people that they put into place, governance issues, anti-corruption issues, all of these are ones that they sort of grew up on, that they care about, and that will come back into foreign policy. That's going to be a big push that you're going to see. And so that is something that has not been part of US foreign policy for the last 4 years. And I think it will start within Mexico. So the kinds of decisions with Cienfuegos and things that happened just in the last couple of weeks, it would be highly doubtful that that would happen under a Biden administration. And so I think you start to pick up those issues and the discussions that are on the table. I think some of those will be quite uncomfortable for a AMLO administration that has not been thinking about them or not really following many of the guidelines that the United States would be looking for people around the world to follow.
Yeah, without a doubt, both governments, Trump's and AMLO's, are unprecedented. And we will learn a lot within the policies and the politics and how they've done and how we can reverse them in future administrations. So now going to you, Maria Jose, I would like to put on the table the issues of the remittances. Do you think they will remain? Do you think they will increase with this new Biden-Harris administration? And also a subject that actually Ebrard mentioned yesterday, which was arms trafficking or arms trade, which is also a huge subject related to security, and that with this new administration and these nominees or candidates, that might change. If you have any insights on that, or do you want to retake any of the subjects related to climate change and John Kerry to be the special focus on that? Please, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Well, remittances are a huge source of income for Mexico, and I would expect that to continue being so. And I think that at some point, the Trump administration kind of threatened with imposing some sort of tax to remittances. I think that doesn't make any sense, and that we will not see this issue coming up. But I do think that something related to remittances is going to be very relevant in the short run, and that is migration. Why do I think migration has the potential to be like a major issue in the bilateral relation moving forward? First, because the COVID pandemic exacerbates the poverty, the inequality, the lack of social mobility, and the political and social instability that have traditionally been associated with the rise of immigration flows. I think we can expect to see like a rise like this take place sooner rather than later, especially from the Central American countries that, in top of the pandemic, have gone through recent devastating hurricanes. So I think circumstances themselves will make migration a salient issue in the short run. Second, I think that immigration is the issue in which the Trump administration screwed Mexico the most. Sorry for the informality, but I cannot think of a better term to use. For this reason, I would expect the Mexican Foreign Ministry to be very interested in shifting course, especially in the case of the Remain in Mexico program, which forces people seeking asylum in the US to remain in Mexico while their legal cases proceed. That has greatly strained Mexico's immigration system, among other problems. I think getting rid of this agreement would be a relatively easy win for Mexico, which leads me to my third point, and that is that immigration is one of the policy issues in which Biden differentiates himself the most from Trump, and I think he will be very interested in acting on it. So I think there is a sense of political opportunity on moving forward on migration issues, but also for tensions. Biden, for example, has committed to regularize the immigration status of Dreamers, and 80% of Dreamers are Mexican. Also, a Biden administration opens the door for a comprehensive immigration reform that may legalize the status of millions of undocumented immigrants, and there are 5 million undocumented Mexicans in the US. Of course, like the feasibility and the scope of these proposals will be very affected by whether Democrats win the Senate. And it seems quite unlikely that this will be the case, but I think that even if the Democrats do not control the Senate, we can expect President Biden to give the congressional fight for immigration reform and maybe also present some executive actions. So I think migration is a major issue to think about. With regards to security, which you mentioned, Nuria, I think we can expect continuity in this agenda, with the Biden administration being very interested in border security and cooperation on fighting organized crime. It is yet to be seen whether the Cienfuegos affair will somehow affect US-Mexico security cooperation, but I do doubt it. And to me, what seems today as the possibly most disruptive element is a potential gun control reform, which Biden pledged he will try to achieve, but that also seems contingent on what happens with the Senate. And finally, I did want to also echo this idea mentioned by Shannon that the environment and energy agenda will become more relevant. This is an issue that has never been considered central to US-Mexico relations, but I think it is inevitable that it will become more and more relevant. First, because climate change is a major international issue, probably the greatest threat to humanity. Mitigating climate change and conducting a sustainable energetic transition is what many countries of the world are working towards, and certainly not what Mexico is prioritizing. Also because protecting the environment is becoming a very central agenda for the Democratic Party. Biden has an ambitious plan, both domestically and internationally, on this issue. And the most progressive wing of his party would probably want him to do even more. And in consequence, I would expect there to be some tensions related to the environment and energy agendas. ranging from the state of Rio Tijuana to controversies under the USMCA because the Mexican government has canceled contracts of US renewable energy companies. Furthermore, the USMCA obliges Mexico to present environmental reports to the US Congress. So I think it will also be interesting and relevant to see how this accountability mechanism plays out in practice. So I will leave it there.
Thank you so much, Maria Jose. I would like to invite everyone, all our participants, to please send us any questions you have for our three panelists. And I would be like, in between time that we get any questions, I would like to raise a question especially related to Kamala Harris. How does it feel to have the first VP woman elected with this administration? What do you think her role will be as VP, and will she be the next contender to the president, to the next administration? I would like to start with you, Maria Jose. What are your insights? And then go with you, Shannon, and to end with you, Vannesa. Thank you.
Great. So first of all, I think that representation matters. And so it's relevant in and of itself that Kamala Harris is going to be vice president, that she, as a woman and person of color, I think that matters for politics, independent of like what is her role in the government and what are like her priorities as VP. I think that there is like, well, a lot of things can happen in 4 years, but that at least today, she looks like a very strong potential candidate for the next presidential election, especially considering Biden's age, and that it will be, I think, unlikely that he will run for a second term. And what role will she play in the administration? I am not sure. Many times VPs play a huge role in foreign policy. This was the case during the Obama administration, in which Biden was the focal person for Latin America and got very involved in international affairs. I am not sure if this will be the case with Harris, but definitely would be interesting to see that. Thanks.
Super. Shannon?
Sure. So, I think she's a great choice, right? And she's a great choice for many reasons. She's a great choice because she represents a different generation than Biden. She's a great choice because she was proven on the campaign trail that she has the poise and she has the ambition and she has the ability to lead and speak and guide and all those things, which we saw as she became VP candidate. She has a choice she's a great choice because she occupied a middle of the road space that I think people on both sides, progressive and sort of more conservative Democrats, are trying to bring the party together. I think she is that person. And she's a great choice because she's also from a big state, right? California is incredibly important within the US system. Now, sometimes people game choosing a vice president from a swing state, which obviously California is not, but in terms of representing the number of Americans, I think it's great that she has been from and worked within a state that represents so many millions of Americans. So I think all of that is, she's a great counterpoint to Biden. And she represents a different kind of person. And as we were talking about the cabinet earlier, the general cabinet has many more women, has many more people of color, has a much more diverse backgrounds of people who are coming into various positions. And I think that will create a much stronger, frankly, government than we've seen in a long time, because you have those different voices and experiences coming into government. What will be her role and how will it work? I mean, that's always the question. And it's often up to the president to decide what role the vice president will play. And so, there have been famous cases where a president comes in and the vice president, they barely see each other for 4 years, and the vice president cuts a lot of ribbons and doesn't do a lot of that. I think it's highly doubtful that that's the kind of president Biden would be. Right? Biden, cherished the way that he and Barack Obama worked together to lead the country and represent the United States here at home and abroad. And I think he would be the same type of person. And even the way they've interacted on the campaign trail, I think he will rely on her in many ways. And the question is, what portfolio will she be given? If I had to guess, and this is all of a guess, Biden really likes foreign policy, so I think he will like to do that, right? He liked it when he was vice president, so I think he will take a big role in the foreign policy realm. And I think there's a lot of realms where Kamala Harris's background and her history within the justice system is really vital. So I can see her playing an important role there too. But I do think this will end up being a partnership in a lot of ways, and also with this larger team. I think that is the kind of administration Biden will build, and Kamala will be the second in command there, helping guide that. And what happens in 4 years? It's a long 4 years, but the vice president is always in a very visible, high profile, but privileged spot in terms of whom would run next for the Democratic Party.
Vanessa?
Thank you, Nuria. And I think I would only add that I think Kamala Harris means a lot in herself and for what she represents and what she stands for. It means a lot, obviously, because of diversity and obviously because of gender, but it also means a lot in terms of her being an accomplished woman and a capable woman, and regardless of being a woman or a man, or being like a person that has all the skills and all the capabilities to perform the role she's about to perform. And I would say that if she goes along either within foreign policy or even a more national stage with the topics that she has been involved in, it's basically those that I touched upon in my previous comments, which is basically justice, democracy, institutions, checks and balances, rule of law. And I think all of them, Mexico has a huge debt in terms of the current administration. So I would say that a lot of the topics she might have at her hand, and her being, the leader in those topics, perhaps domestically or internationally or both. I think it would be something that is yet to be seen, the way they play out in terms of the bilateral relationship with Mexico, no? And again, I think that those issues related to not complying to agreements, not complying to the rule of law, changing rules all of the sudden without any, narrative or legal grounds, I think those are going to be very touchy issues for her portfolio. So I think that is yet to be seen how Mexico deals with that in the coming administration.
We have now so many questions, but so little time now. So I think Alma will start the first round of questions.
Sure. So what we'll do is just we have over 15 questions, I think, in the last 10 minutes. So thank you to the panelists for the time and for the insights, and for our guests to posing this question. So what I'll do is I'll condense in 3 questions and then just ask the panel, and then and based on the question, we'll move forward. The first one is, what do you think we could expect from U.S.-Mexico cooperation within the Mérida Initiative framework? I suspect, Vannesa, that you could be able to address that question. Also, this question from Victor Gamas: can we expect further U.S.-Mexico cooperation in trade, specifically with regards to CPTPP, as a response by the Biden administration to China's leadership in the RCEP? Even China's president Xi has recently expressed interest in joining the CPTPP. There, Shannon, if I might ask you to address that question, that would be fabulous. Also, for Shannon, this is a question. Given your piece arguing that Mexican migration will be a big issue in 2021, do you think that Mexico is doing enough or has the capacity to dissuade this potential new wave? And how do you think the Biden-Harris administration can assist the Mexican government to address these flows in the future? And finally, we have also a question, María José, directed at you from Jessica Lopez, where she asks that you've mentioned that for the current Mexican administration has won in a scenario of such a narrow agenda, but how exactly can you describe this positive winning? In which areas in particular? Thank you. So shall we start with Vannesa and then move to Shannon, and then we'll finalize with María José.
Thank you, Alma. Well, I think the Mérida Initiative is over, and some days ago, Marcelo Ebrard even mentioned it. I think in those terms. We will see another vision, another narrative, other priorities, and of course, another proper name for whatever scheme of collaboration there is between Mexico and the United States for security issues. And that might or might not be linked to other topics around the security issues. What I think is relevant for Mexico is to acknowledge the fact that among the huge possibilities and the positive aspects of the change of administration in the US in relation to the relationship with Mexico is precisely that, being able to create a different set of narrative, of priorities, of cooperation schemes, of views on security, on migration. So I would say that we're facing the possibility of perhaps having the best person as counterpart being Joe Biden, that knows Mexico, that knows Latin America, that knows how migration works, and that has a different vision in terms of human rights, in terms of development, in terms of looking at the root causes of migration. I had the opportunity to travel with then Vice President Biden to Central America to deal with the crisis of unaccompanied migrants that went to Mexico into the US. And it's a complete different vision. Actually, what we were looking at was how to cooperate with the Northern Triangle countries in order for them to not be sending their kids or their grandsons and grandchildren to the US to go with their parents, because it was a very, very challenging and very a threat to their security. So I think we have that possibility now to look into security and look into migration from another perspective, from the perspective of development, from the perspective of cooperation, from the perspective of the root causes again. And I think this institutionalization in these two topics is something that Mexico should take advantage of, because there are good possibilities for a new narrative and for cooperating with Central America and for cooperation between Mexico and the US in both aspects, in security in the one hand and in migration in the other hand. And one thing I would like to say is that the weight of a president is huge, but we're going to be looking at the entire institutional administration weight, and that's a much heavier one. But it's one that if we are intelligent, we should be able to take advantage of and have the best from that as well, in security and in migration included. No.
Great. Let me pick up on the CPTPP. And Trump famously pulled out right during his first few days in office from joining the what was the TPP at the time, now the CPTPP. But Obama had a really hard time with the Democratic wing on some of the measures that were within this trade agreement. And so there is a question about whether a Biden administration would come back into it. He's already said that he's going to focus on other things first rather than trade. So trade is not going to be first up on the agenda. I think the UK is upset about this because Brexit, they thought they were going to get an agreement. That's not going to be a big priority for this administration. But I do see a way back into CPTPP for the US. And in fact, the USMCA, that THEMEC actually provides that path. And what that path is, well, it's two things. One, it is reframing the reasons to get into CPTPP, not just on economic reasons, but on national security reasons. And I actually think the signing of the RCEP, which is an Asian agreement that does not include the United States, that sort of intensifies this worry about Asia moving ahead without us. And I actually think she's stepping forward and saying he might join the CPTPP. I mean, frankly, I think that's just trolling by the Chinese head of state. The things China would have to do to change its economy to join the CPTPP, opening up public procurement, and they're not going to do that, right? In fact, they're moving in the other direction in terms of sort of a heavy state hand. But the idea that he was throwing it out there is sort of teasing the United States in a way, or sort of, taunting, I would say. And so this idea of reframing it as a national security issue, I think could get some traction, right? That it's important for geopolitical reasons for the United States to be in there, not as much economic reasons. And then if you had some adjustments in CPTPP that followed along, USMCA on the environment, on labor issues, those sorts of clauses, which I think some countries might be open to, you could actually see the United States come back in. So there's space there, but it's not going to be in the first 6 months or maybe year. The other challenge I'll just say is within the US, the TPA authority, the Trade Promotion Authority, which allows Congress or forces Congress to vote up or down on trade agreements, that expires next summer. So depending on what happens in the summit, we may or may not see an executive, a president of the United States who can actually pass free trade agreements or do it very easily. Without it, it's much harder to get anything through. Then let me just say a word about migration. And I think this could be the first domestic policy crisis for the Biden administration, is a movement of people, both Central Americans who are driven by COVID, who are driven by 2 hurricanes in a row, who are driven by coyotes and human traffickers who tell them like now's the time to get in because the rules are going to change. I think you could, and driven by an AMLO government who's less interested in Remain in Mexico and controlling those flows, combined with Mexicans who for lots of reasons too are starting to leave. We had a whole decade where Mexican net flows were negative, more people going back to Mexico than coming to the United States. That started to change already. And I think as we look at COVID, we look at the recession, we look at rising violence in different parts of the country in Mexico, a lot of the other challenges, you could see Mexicans trying to leave as well. I do think the United States, we have our COVID challenges, which can take up hours of panels, but if and when we get to the other side of this with vaccines, the US economy has been much more resilient than anybody thought last March when this hit. And I do think once we get past, and when we do get a vaccine, we will see a booming US economy. I think there's lots of reasons why the US economy will outperform on the other side of this, which will be helpful to Mexico. But it will also draw people from Mexico north who have ties here and to migrate north. So you may see an even greater pull because the US relatively is doing better than a Mexico or Central American countries, which I don't think will recover economically as quickly. So I think that is a challenge. So what will the Biden administration do with a migration crisis? This is going to be a real challenge. But what I would say is, one, it's a challenge with the number of people. 2, it's a number challenge with just who's in government and people just getting started. And 3, they're facing a broken US migration system that over the last 4 years has just eroded and become incredibly fragile. What I think that's going to mean is in some way, shape, or form, Mexico and the United States are going to have to work together on this, and Mexico is going to have to continue a role they've been playing since 2014, which is to slow and diminish the flows to the US border. So Remain in Mexico, yes, that may disappear over time, but this management of people, I don't think will disappear. And the sort of pressure from the US to have Mexico help in that process. The difference will be, it will not be so punitive. If you don't stop these people, I'm slapping tariffs on you. The difference will be, I think there'll be carrots involved. There'll be money, there'll be support, there'll be help in Mexico and in Central America, which we haven't seen for the last 4 years. So I think it'll be a kinder, gentler way of managing the migration flows, but it's still going to be a big ask of Mexico to help manage them.
María José, if you want to.
Yes, thanks. So regarding this question, how has the narrow view from the Trump administration on US-Mexico relations benefited Mexico? Well, basically the relationship focused on the renegotiations of the NAFTA agreement and on stopping Central Americans from reaching the United States, which I think has been like very pernicious for Mexico, both the Remain in Mexico policy and just like making the Guardia Nacional play a big role in stopping immigrants from coming into Mexico and all the human rights violations involved and all the investment in terms of security that has meant. What has the Mexican government won from this? I think more than winning on other agendas is the lack of checks that have existed in the bilateral relations on energy issues, labor issues, crime issues, respecting contracts from US companies. We have not had a very outspoken US ambassador in Mexico. I think that will change too. And that this has not necessarily benefited Mexico, but has benefited the Mexican government. And that the Mexican government also won something from the personalistic White House-centered decision-making, even though it created a lot of uncertainty. It also meant that if you had a good relationship with the White House, then you could get things like easily moving forward like, for example, we see with the very recent Cienfuegos deal. And I think that now we will see experts and agencies much more involved in decision-making in terms of the bilateral relation, and that is good for Mexico and for having like in-depth and meaningful agreement with the United States, but not necessarily good for the short-term interests of the Mexican government, who have been used in these last 4 years to just solving things directly with the White House, and with a White House that is not very involved in what is going on in Mexico and is not very critical of issues I think are debatable and worth noting. I will leave it there.
Thank you, Maria Jose. And just as a final question, I would like to raise a possible scenario. Imagine that you're in an elevator with Andrés Manuel López Obrador and with Joe Biden, and you have 2 seconds to provide an input or a suggestion of what should be the policy towards Mexico if you were with Joe Biden, and what should be the policy towards US if you were with Andrés Manuel. But this would be, as you know, time is of essence. So if you can just provide a brief suggestion, what would that be? I'll start with Shannon, then go with Vannesa, and then finally go with Maria Jose. Thank you, everyone.
I would say to Biden, I would say, make it broad, put everything on the agenda. And I would say to López Obrador, look forward, not back.
Thank you, Vannesa.
In my case, I would say to Biden, be mindful of democracy in Mexico and its undermining. And to Andrés Manuel, I would say, be positive and look into opportunities that may arise. Not everything is negative.
Thank you. And Maria Jose.
To López Obrador, I would say have like thick skin, and the cautious like relation you have had with the US during the Trump administration, like it's probably worth keeping, like not getting, engaging in tensions that are not worth it, or like discursive problems. And to Biden, I would agree with Shannon, and I would say like keep it broad and meaningful. Like relations in the last 4 years have been very superficial.
Thank you. So now just I'm really sorry to all the participants that we couldn't get to all the amazing questions. There were really good ones related to Latin America, security, taxing, but I guess we need to make another SHEtalks. That's the only reason we can, that's the perfect example we can do to address all of these subjects. And I would like to end with a 30-second conclusion, first with Maria Jose, then with Vannesa, and to end with Shannon, just to say goodbye to this amazing forum. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, I would say that the US-Mexico relationship is very complex. It involves multiple actors, multiple levels, even if today we have been mostly speaking about like presidential, federal level of decisions, and that this is a very interesting relation, and that it is worried for all of us to follow it closely, because there's a lot in stake for Mexico and for both the US in terms of what happens in the bilateral relation. And just thank you, Nuria, Alma, Vannesa, Shannon, COMEXI, and US-Mexico Foundation for the invitation and the engaging discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria Jose. It was a pleasure. Vannesa, please.
Thank you so much for organizing this event. And I would say that, yes, indeed, Mexico-US relationship is a deep one, is a complex one, is one that is there to stay. You can change friends, but you cannot change neighbors. So we're still going to be there for a long while. And we'd better take the most out of it. And obviously there's challenges, but there's new opportunities as well. And Mexico should be profoundly reflecting on what those opportunities are, because we need them. We need the US, and we need the US-Mexico relationship to work for the better in Mexico. We need good news in Mexico.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Vannesa. Shannon, please.
Great. Well, it was great to join all of you and my two colleagues. I agree with all that and what they put on the table. The only other thing I would put on the table as we go forward is that, you know, we've talked a lot about government officials and agencies and bureaus, but the US-Mexico relationship is not just governments, right? It's the press, it's the private sector, and it is civil society. And so I want to thank COMEXI, I want to thank the US-Mexico Foundation, and organizations like these two are vital in guiding where the relationship heads next. So I look forward to seeing you all participate in this as well.
Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you, Alma. I want to thank the PJCOMEXI for organizing this in alliance with the SHEtalks with the US-Mexico Foundation, and to my fellow moderator, Alma. It was amazing to do this with you.
Thank you so much, Nuria. Thank you, our panelists, and happy Thanksgiving to our American friends, and have a wonderful week, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Bye-bye.
Gracias.